Onward.
Thank you, Pat. Hi, I'm Sally Piccirillo. I'm co-president with Pat Moran, and we'd like to welcome our speakers today. We're really excited about the program, and also we'd like to thank all our visitors who joined us today. Pat's already made her announcement about being recorded. I think there's a way to actually mute it yourself so that you're not recorded if you're familiar with Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
And you can take your image off also, yeah.
Yeah, you can take your image off. So with that, I'd like to again thank everyone for coming today, and I'll turn it over to Norlin.
Welcome, everyone. Program planning has found a wonderful group that we're very excited to present to you. We have wonderful speakers from Encinitas4Equality, a local group that is really working on equity in so many aspects of our life. And I think you'll find, as we did, that that's a very inspiring group. I would like to introduce, it's my pleasure to introduce Molly Woods-Drake, who is the president and co-founder of Encinitas4Equality. She is an East Coast native who made Encinitas her home 7 years ago. Molly was raised by two community labor organizers and often jokes that she was born with a picket sign in her hand. She has also always been active in the social justice movement, beginning her career as an activist volunteering for the 2008 Obama campaign. She has worked for SEIU as a union organizer for 11 years. Having the opportunity to lead alongside the incredible team of activists within her own community fuels Molly's commitment to justice. Molly Woods-Drake, we're delighted to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Norlin, and thank you, everybody. Wow, all of a sudden I pop up as the main person spotlighted. So yeah, thank you so much for having Encinitas4Equality here today. Thank you for the introduction. It's true. I joke I was born with that picket hand in my sign. My dad was one of the co-founders or one of the early founders of the farm workers movement and Cesar Chavez's right-hand man. And my mom left Arizona when she was about 20 years old and also came to California when she heard about farm workers having the right to organize. And so that's where she met my dad. I would be born in Mississippi when they were organizing the first Black woodcutters into a credit union. 3 years prior, they had been evicted from their home for inviting Black guests over for dinner. And so in many ways, the work of my life has been racial justice, social justice. It's what I've been raised to do, and was fortunate to have a career and fortunate to continue to have a career in this role working for SEIU. But, the work I get to do, and, we're an entire non-volunteer grassroots organization with Encinitas4Equality, is the culmination of all of the passion of both my parents, the legacy left behind, and it's such a gift to get to work beside some of my other leaders who are going to be speaking here today. So I'm going to just share my screen to give a little bit of a slideshow of E4E. Can everyone see that? Perfect. So Encinitas4Equality was founded after the murder of George Floyd. We, myself, and 4 other women came together. It was actually Council Member Kelly Hinsey who was a connection between all of us, and she had posted on her social media that she needed to do something to respond to what had happened. And a couple women reached out and said, let us know what to do. We did an art installation at the Cardiff Kook, which was hundreds of names of Black lives that had been taken by police brutality. And unfortunately, that same night, it was ripped down by a woman who happened to see it. She came, tore down, 7 large 8x10 boards, broke all of the glass, trashed all of the flowers. And we came back together that night and decided, you know what, we'll put it back up tomorrow, but we're going to let the community know that we're doing this because we don't know how long it's going to be there. And we want people to have the same opportunity to come and pay respects, to grieve, to mourn, to rage, whatever it was. And the next evening, about 300 people showed up to be part of that. And we knew that there was an interest here in our backyard for racial justice. People asked, will you be here tomorrow? And we were able to keep that installation up for the whole week. Every night of the week, we had protest, had people come down there and speak. And part of that was how we were able to be introduced to some of our Black neighbors who, quite honestly, for me living here for 7 years, this is the least diverse place that I've ever lived, and had the opportunity to meet people like Lydell, who's on here, Marlon, who entrusted myself and the other co-founders, Jody and Felicia, with when I asked Lydell, will you speak at City Hall and what we're doing there? And he said, yes, I'll do that. And it's a great amount of trust for communities of color to place into people like myself. And from there, we were able to have our first leadership meeting where we came up with what would become our vision and mission. That meeting, that meeting was about 15 of us sat down together, and our initial 2020 vision was to focus entirely on the movement for Black lives. We understood that while there's so many different areas of inequity, whether within our LGBT communities, our Latinx community, that the community that was most under attack at this moment were our Black communities. And when you lift the most marginalized group, everybody else is lifted with them. And so our mission has evolved over time, but what ultimately we have come to is that we will educate, organize, and mobilize our community to disassemble structural racism, systemic inequities, and oppression through solidarity and service. And so systemic inequities is something that was added into 2021 because we do recognize that not all inequities are race related. Well, that's a huge part, but there's also here in Encinitas a large population of our unhoused community, people that are facing eviction because they can't keep up with the rising cost of rent. And so we wanted to make sure that we're also looking at different inequities that are occurring in our backyard. And so who are we? As I mentioned before, we are a group entirely volunteers, grassroots. We are made up of 6 working groups, which I'll share shortly. We're local leaders, so we have 25 volunteer leaders who manage those working groups. They meet typically once a week, and they're also our back-end volunteers. I know nothing about creating a website. I don't know very much about, it's like these are the people that you often won't see, but who have made it possible for Encinitas4Equality to become who we are. There are community event planners. We have a community center and host a large number of events, whether it's virtual or in person. There are planners that help make that possible. And then there are people like yourself. It's like other community organizations that have been doing this work, incredible work, justice work for decades, for years. And we know that we're not experts in every one of these areas, nor do we want to reinvent the wheel. And we truly believe that when there's collaboration as opposed to competition, there's the ability to succeed in so many more ways. And so our working groups, as I mentioned, at that first leadership meeting, it's really amazing to me that we still are focused on these same working groups, but it's also no surprise for anyone that's done work in racial justice or justice that you see the trickle effect in some of the same areas. So our business group is one of our arms, our community and advocacy, equity and education, housing, public safety, youth outreach were the initial ones that we created, and then scholarship and mentorship stemmed out of a recognition of lack of equity in education. So what did these working groups do? Is they develop a problem statement. They look at what's happening in our own backyard and they tell that story. You'll hear a little bit about this from our equity and ed group and our housing group. They campaign by educating and engaging our public. As I mentioned before, I'm an organizer by career, and so I understand that we are not about just giving information and educating people. We're actually about turning that into action. Any one of us can sit home and read books all day, but that's not going to change the decades and decades of systemic oppression that's been occurring. And then we find those actionable solutions that we can take. Some of that looks like policy and lobbying to our city council or legislation. Some of it's direct aid. We host humanity showers once a month at our space, which provides showers, meals, toiletries for unhoused. And so we look at any area where we can actually take whatever this problem statement is, and large or small, come up with some actionable solutions to that. So a little bit about our groups that you're not going to hear from directly today. So our business group is one of the things that I'm sure many people realized is there was this big push to shop Black after the murder of George Floyd. And as what I think is really the second civil rights movement is what we're in right now. And if you, like me, were someone that was trying to shop Black in your backyard, you found that there was nowhere to shop. There are no Black-owned brick and mortar spaces in Encinitas. And in North County as a whole, there's a very few. I can name Felix's Barbecue and a hair salon in San Marcos. And this is after trying to do a lot of work to find how do we shop Black and put our resources and money into these communities and businesses. And so what our business group did is try to, one, make sure that our existing workplaces are affirmatively anti-racist, but two, how do we create a welcome community here in Encinitas where Black business owners would want to come here? And so that is where we created the Community Collective, which was initially at 414 North Coast Highway. It's Gather Yoga Studio for people that are familiar with that. They weren't able to operate, obviously, in COVID, and allowed us to, gave us a great rate to be able to start our first collective there. So the picture on the bottom is myself and Michelle, who is now our current on-site resident artist. But Michelle at that time is something that was just so moving to me. She came and was hanging her art. I had found her on Facebook and reached out and was like, do you want to sell your art at our shop? And she was so moved to do it. But when she came and she was hanging her art, she started to cry. And she said, I've never seen my art hung on any walls outside of my own home. And it was just such an incredible gift to share that with her. But to see Michelle now, she hosts Paint and Sips. She is involved all over San Diego County, teaching art to youth and making sure that youth see themselves represented in other artists. She has her studio on site at our space. And these are the things, it's like our business group is trying to be an incubator of sorts for Black-owned businesses. Our current space is 1900 North Coast Highway. We have 35 Black-owned businesses that sell their products and their art out of that space. And we're incredibly grateful that we were awarded a $25,000 grant from the County of San Diego, which allows us to have these Black-owned businesses sell their products rent-free and be able to, network and showcase, and that now we have Black-owned businesses in a brick and mortar spot here in Encinitas. Community and advocacy. One of the big things that we know is that racism isn't necessarily fueled by hate. Oftentimes it's fueled by fear and the unknown. And so we truly believe that the end of racism begins with hello. And if we have the opportunity to sit down with people that we don't know, from communities that we don't know, that don't look like us, that don't pray like us, that don't eat what we eat, that we begin to get curious and we want to know more about these people. And the more we know, the less our fear is going to lead to division. And so our community and advocacy group, their primary purpose is host events, host workshops, have discussion groups, and create these relationships that didn't exist before. I always say that this is the most important work, but it's also the least tangible. For anyone that applies for a grant, for anyone that knows when you're running a nonprofit, they always want to see these metrics. And it's really hard to create the metric of my friendship with Lydell, my friendship with Dahlia, and the impact that that has on both of our lives. But this is also where the work really begins, is that once we're invested in our brothers and sisters, we will be their keepers indefinitely. And so that's the work of community and advocacy. Equity and education, I'm going to let them share more about themselves shortly. But I will just touch on, after all of us have really grappled and evolved with the mission, but ultimately the vision